I'm going to share with you a little bit about our speaker tonight. Allison is the Deputy Director of the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center. She works collaboratively with the Brookings Institution to analyze the state of the New Orleans recovery through the regular publication of the New Orleans Index, and with the Urban Institute to analyze the state of housing in the New Orleans metro region. Allison is recognized as an expert in post-Katrina demographics and New Orleans recovery trends. Allison spearheaded the City of New Orleans challenge to the Census Bureau's 2007 population estimate, resulting in nearly 50,000 person adjustment to the Bureau's estimate of the city's population, and again in 2008, resulting in another 25,000 person adjustment, ultimately bringing the estimate for New Orleans within 3% of the 2010 census count. She frequently provides commentary on recovery issues to local and national media. She joined the Greater New Orleans Community Data Center with 12 years experience developing the management capacity of nonprofit and micro-enterprise organizations in New Orleans, the San Francisco Bay Area, and Guatemala. Additionally, she has almost a decade of experience in the for-profit sector as a marketing consultant to large and small companies, including AT&T, Barnes & Noble, Lexus, and Inc. magazine. Allison received her doctorate in science from Tulane University's, yay, School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine with a dissertation entitled An Analysis of Administrative Data for Measuring Population Displacement and Resettlement Following a Catastrophic U.S. Event. She has an MBA in Marketing and Organizational Behavior from the Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern University and a BA in Religious Studies and Spanish from Vanderbilt. Her lecture tonight is entitled New Orleans Index at 6. We thought this was a great way to start this series, talking about the recovery of New Orleans and how this fits into the global environment. And so, as she describes it, the New Orleans Index at 6 reveals emerging signs of a healthier economy, improved basic services in the New Orleans metro region, but much work remains to make real progress on inclusive growth in and around sustainability of the region. Significant opportunities remain to leverage competitive strengths in energy, higher education, shipping, and heavy construction and engineering to capitalize on fast-growing sectors such as wind energy manufacturing, carbon storage, and water management. So please join me in welcoming Allison here tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here. I know there's a lot of things you could be doing, and I appreciate your spending your time here with us tonight. I'm going to try to go through the New Orleans Index at 6 kind of quickly, and to leave some time for questions and answers. There's probably a lot of things I could talk about, whether I know anything about them or not, and I'm happy to take your questions. So I'm going to try to go through this sort of quickly, but also to the extent that I can, focusing on globalization and sustainability. So the New Orleans Index at 6 actually sprang from the New Orleans Index series. It's something the Brookings Institution and the Greater New Orleans Data Center co-published since 2007 to track the recovery of New Orleans. And it became really the go-to resource for national and local media, decision makers at all levels of government, from the feds all the way down to the city, researchers and leaders in the private sector and nonprofit community. And then at the 5th anniversary, we decided to not track recovery, not look at how we were doing compared to 2005, but instead take a broader view of how we're doing in general. So at that anniversary, we looked at 20 different indicators to examine progress in general toward prosperity. And we added to that 7 essays contributed by local scholars and practitioners on the major reforms that have been undertaken, or several of the major reforms that have been undertaken in New Orleans post-Katrina. And then this year, at the 6th anniversary, those essays were put together in a book by the Brookings Institution. It's an edited volume entitled Resilience and Opportunity, Lessons from the U.S. Gulf Coast After Katrina and Rita. And what I wanted to say about that is that those of us who live in New Orleans sometimes may not realize how important the lessons that we've learned here are for the rest of the world, really, because there have been multiple catastrophic disasters since 2005. And in many ways, 2005, what happened here on the Gulf Coast, was the first catastrophic disaster in sort of modern history. And so the whole world continues to call and ask, what did we learn on the Gulf Coast that they can use in Japan, that they can use in Haiti, that they can use in Pakistan? We had massive floods in Pakistan a year ago, which you may have already forgotten about. There was a massive earthquake in China, I believe in 2007, which again you may have already forgotten about. And then of course we know about the tornadoes this past summer that decimated Joplin, Missouri, and destroyed much of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So those are catastrophes because of the way that they really wipe out whole systems. And what happened here on the Gulf Coast was a catastrophe as well. And there are a lot of lessons that we wanted to harvest. Now, we think that really what's happening on the Gulf Coast is a work in progress, and that this is a catastrophic event that will probably take 10 or more years to recover from, according to the experts. So we're sort of at the midway point, but still it's a good opportunity to document those lessons. So this book documents measurable progress in the transformation of public education, healthcare delivery, criminal justice reform, evacuation planning, the installation of an inspector general, the adoption of a citywide master plan, a measurable rise in civic engagement, a more informed and sophisticated network of neighborhood organizations and nonprofits that have undertaken holistic strategies to rebuild neighborhoods. So at the 6th anniversary, we thought we'd put together the data for the New Orleans Index again to see to what extent all these reform efforts are putting the New Orleans Metro on course toward greater prosperity. So we looked at more than 20 indicators reaching back to 1980 and to assess the extent to which we're rebounding better than our historic path. Now, this is important because researchers analyzing disasters as far back as the 1890s found that disasters the magnitude of Hurricane Katrina often accelerate pre-disaster trajectories. So if you were losing population and had a weak economy, you would start to lose population faster and have a weaker economy. And then, on the other hand, if you were booming, then a catastrophic disaster might make you boom faster. And so the question is, what's happening to us? Because I think we all know we had a weak economy before the storm and we were losing population. But there are cases where regions hit by catastrophic disasters broke from their historic path when residents and leaders used the interruption in the status quo to transform key institutions, using outside rebuilding investments to make those institutions stronger, and then capitalized on emerging economic opportunities. And New Orleans' case is particularly striking because the region has been hit by not one crisis, but 3 in 5 years: Katrina, the Great Recession, and the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. But despite this, there is evidence to suggest that the region may be on the path to transformation. So we examined indicators covering these key dimensions of prosperity: economic growth, inclusive growth, sustainability, and improved quality of life. And just for definitional purposes, primarily we talk about the 7-parish metro area. That's the 5 parishes in green here. For some of the economic indicators, we cover the 10-parish metro area because that's the area that's covered by our economic development entity, GNO Inc. And for some of the indicators, we compare ourselves to a list of 57 what are called weak city metros. Brookings did a study some time ago looking at a group of 65 older industrial cities that have experienced decades of economic decline, and we are among them. I think folks understand what the Rust Belt is, and you can see all those cities on this map, but there are other cities, including ourselves, which also are very post-industrial and have experienced significant decline. So this is a sort of a peer group that we've compared ourselves to in some of this data. So in short, our research finds, as Sandy said a minute ago, that we continue to recover and in some ways are rebounding better than before with some signs of a healthier economy, improved schools and basic services, but several economic, social, and environmental trends are troubling and indicate that challenges remain. And to further the region on the path to transformation, leaders and residents should continue to leverage rebuilding investments to further the reforms that are underway while capitalizing on emerging economic opportunities, and I'll explain all of that. So first, the positive trends. The New Orleans economy has weathered the recession relatively well, buffered by the stimulus of billions of dollars of public and private post-Katrina rebuilding investments. We've received about $45 billion in federal and also private investments in rebuilding our city, and that is massive compared to what most regions around the country receive through the federal economic stimulus package. So this is a massive stimulus, and it is definitely buoying our economy. We've lost only 0.1% of jobs over the last 3 years, whereas the nation lost 4.5% of jobs overall. And so looking at median household incomes, we've historically had lower median incomes than the nation, and you can see that here. But in the last decade, the nation's median income has fallen 7% because of the recession, and our incomes have held steady. Then we looked at some of the important economic drivers in our region. And for every region, there are certain industries that actually drive growth. And those are the industries that serve customers outside the region because they bring revenue into the region. So for every regional export job, not international, but regional export job, you will have 2 local serving jobs or jobs in the supply chain. And so if you gain a regional export job, you will gain roughly 2 local serving jobs. And similarly, if you lose an export job, you'll lose roughly 2 local serving jobs. And typically regional export jobs have higher average wages than local serving jobs. So these trends that you see here are true for New Orleans. They're true for essentially every metro area. So what are our regional export industries? Well, these are the top 10, and I will make them a little larger. We're going to ignore the declining ones at the top and look at these growing ones at the bottom because I'm sticking to the good news for now. And these are our knowledge-based industries. Hopefully you can see that the top one there is higher education, as well as legal services and insurance agencies that serve clients from outside the region. These have grown significantly in the last 30 years. They represented about 10,000 jobs in 1980. They represent about 17,000 jobs now. And you can see that higher education has actually surpassed shipbuilding as our 4th largest driver. Long before shipbuilding really started to decline in a major way. So very important player in our economy right now. And then wages also are now finally at the national average. Average wages were growing, as you can see, before Katrina hit. And then they grew about 7% between 2000 and 2004. And then when Katrina hit, they skyrocketed. Some of this was because we lost a lot of lower wage jobs, particularly in tourism, but also this is because in general many institutions here started paying higher wages because some of the cost of living went up. So for the first time since 1984, our average wages are on par with the nation. And entrepreneurship has spiked post-Katrina. We heard a lot about this and wondered if it was just anecdotes, and we were happy to find a data set to quantify it. And it's difficult to quantify entrepreneurship. It's also very difficult to quantify businesses and small businesses in general. So this is just one indicator. This is the number of individuals starting up businesses per 100,000 adult population. And as you can see, we trailed the nation. We were closer to our weak city metro peers before Katrina. Then Katrina hit, and it's really skyrocketed and is quite a bit higher than the national average. And in quality of life, we have always had a larger per capita number of arts and culture organizations than the nation. You can see Orleans quite a bit above the national average historically, and then that spike post-Katrina. We increased the number of organizations. Our population also dropped significantly, so that accounts for part of the spike. But if you just look at the raw number of organizations, we had 81 in 2004, and we have 98 now, despite a smaller population to support that growth. And then, as you probably all know, we have a major efforts going on to reform our public schools. This is one indicator of the upward trends in our public schools. The changes have been most significant in Orleans, but it's happening around the metro area. Before the storm in 2003, 28% of the students in Orleans public schools, which included charters, attended schools that passed state standards. The rest attended schools that were considered failing schools. They didn't meet state standards. Now that's gone up to 68%, and as you can see, it's an upward trend. So certainly we hope that that continues upward. And then it's harder to find measures of sustainability. It's easy to find economic indicators, but we look hard for them, and so here's one. Air quality actually has continued to improve in the New Orleans metro since 2000. I'm sure this doesn't count the marsh fire. But it reflects in part national and state regulations that are mandating emissions reductions, and as well as a more modern fleet of post-Katrina buses and cars. So for those of you who knew what it was like around here before Katrina and then saw all the flooded out junkers under the I-10, there are many brand new cars in town that there were not before. And then there's the buses too. So, but there are obviously still quite a number of troubling trends. So looking again at those economic drivers, despite the short-term stimulus from rebuilding investments, trends since 1980 reveal New Orleans region has a sluggish economy, largely reliant on legacy industries. The three largest drivers there are tourism, oil and gas, and then shipping and logistics. They've all shed tens of thousands of jobs over the last 3 decades, and the gains in the knowledge industries that I pointed out earlier haven't made up for those losses. They're still way below those top drivers. So this reliance on legacy industries that are declining doesn't bode well for future job growth. And although the number of adults with a college education in the metro area has grown every decade since 1980, these gains lag national gains. So 26% of New Orleans metro adults have a bachelor's degree compared to 28% nationwide, and 54% of adults locally have at least some college compared to 57% nationwide. And then we looked at something called job sprawl, and actually Richard Campanella, one of the best geographers around, and we're lucky to have him in here at Tulane, helped us with this map. The number of jobs in a parish is not an economic indicator. It's an indicator of sustainability. Because what you look at for economics is the whole region. But if you want to know about a sustainability issue, then you look by parish, because what we see here is that we have significant job sprawl. And Jefferson actually accounts now for more of the jobs in the metro area than Orleans does. This is common in metro areas across the country. It's not unusual for jobs to sprawl out. Basically, the way the process goes is that over the decades, and you probably know more about this than me, but the federal government builds highways, in our case, built levees, drain swamps, and then residents move out to sprawl out, right, across the metro area. Then retailers follow that, and that's one process, but the process that here we're documenting is those driver industries that move out of the downtown area, right? So it's one thing to have retailers out in suburban areas serving residents in those areas. It's another to have Chevron move to St. Tammany. And so that's where you start to have, real significant issues regarding congestion, regarding productivity. There's a lot of research that shows that, that like firms and workers are more productive if they are geographically proximate. So, you go out to lunch in the CBD and you bump into the other lawyers and you share ideas and that sort of thing. And so that's why you have the Silicon Valley, is you need clustering, right? And so to do some of this spreading can be counterproductive. But more so, certainly, it's also a sustainability issue. In terms of inclusion, we looked at the disparities in income, and this is pretty stark. What you see there in green is the New Orleans metro. White households earn 50% more than black households in the New Orleans metro, and 30% more than Hispanic households. What's striking, if you just look at the black households on the far right, is that they have historically earned less than their national peers, black households nationally. What's really striking is that white households locally, that change from 2000 to 2009 is not statistically significant. You can see the tiny little NS. Not statistically significant, that's basically just flat. But the white household income have fallen statistically nationwide. So now white households nationwide earn less than white households locally, and black households locally earn less than black households nationally. So we have a larger disparity here than the national disparity. This is tracking suburbanization of poverty, which is also consistent with national trends. It happened, you can see, before Katrina hit. The number of people living in poverty in the suburbs was growing and declining in the city being the yellow line there. So then Katrina hit and those trends accelerated, partly because we lost a lot of the poorer population who weren't able to return, but also the suburbs lost a lot of the poorer population, but not as much as we did. So that trend towards suburbanization of poverty, which as I said is a national trend, got accelerated here when the storm hit. And this is looking at housing. The federal standard is that of your total pre-tax household income, you should not have to pay more than 30% on housing costs, which for renters includes rent and utilities, for homeowners includes mortgage, taxes, utilities, and insurance. And so if you're paying more than 30%, then you're considered housing cost burdened. And we bumped that up to 35% because many experts say that actually that percentage should go up, as so many people spend so much on housing. And even at that higher threshold, 55% of New Orleans renters now spend more than 35% of their pre-tax income on housing, and 33% of New Orleans homeowners now spend more of their pre-tax income on housing than 35%. And this, if we broke down just the costs versus the incomes, is the costs certainly went up a great deal, but they are, to some extent, on par with a lot of other cities nationwide. What's the real problem in New Orleans is that we have such a large number of low-paying jobs. 45% of all full-time, year-round workers in the New Orleans metro make less than $35,000 a year. And then looking at crime, violent property crime rates have actually fallen to below pre-Katrina levels. Yellow is Orleans, that sort of turquoise is the suburban parishes, the rest of the metro, and then the navy blue is the U.S. Top section is property crimes, bottom section is violent crimes. In the 1990s, we had an incredible crime epidemic here, for those who weren't here, and crime came down quite a bit nationally and particularly locally. It spiked after Katrina, and is now down to, and I'll make this a little bit bigger, down to just below pre-Katrina levels, but still violent crimes in the city are almost twice the national average. And nationwide, more and more commuters are using public transit. That's a statistically significant increase from 4.6% to 5%. But at that same, over the last decade, but unfortunately at the same time, fewer Orleans commuters are using public transit, partly because we have significantly less buses, and to some extent because of changing distribution of those resources and workers. And this is my last piece of bad news, I swear. 29% of the coastal wetlands that protect the New Orleans metro have been converted to open water since 1932. And I bet you all know exactly what the significance of that is. So I won't belabor it. So from this report, our recommendations are that in order to continue the region on the path to transformation, remember, we can either go downward after the disaster or transform ourselves and go upward. And looking at that literature about what it takes, what we need to do is to continue to use our rebuilding investments to further the reforms to our major institutions, which are ongoing. And at the same time, we have to capitalize on emerging economic opportunities. There's been a tremendous amount of progress in New Orleans in the last 6 years as we've worked on all these major reforms. But leaders have to be vigilant to sustain and expand on that progress, because many of these reforms are really just, in some ways, just beginning. They have significant potential to raise standards of living and build a safer and more just community. But at the same time, most of them have been dependent on massive federal rebuilding investments. So over the long term, New Orleans will need a stronger economy in order to further prosperity and inclusion in the region. And there are currently some significant opportunities to grow the economy by helping new and existing industries better tap the growth in emerging world markets. We probably have heard about the expansion of the Panama Canal, the growth in the Brazilian market as a really important new world player. Those are really important opportunities for our shipping and logistics industries. And similarly, there are also really important opportunities in clean tech industries. I've named a few here that the Brookings Institution has done a report on which are the fastest growing clean tech jobs. And these line up well with studies that have been done by GNO Inc. about where we specifically have some core competencies. So by taking our strengths in shipping and logistics, energy, engineering, and higher education, we can expand into some of these rapidly growing industries like oil spill remediation, wind energy manufacturing, some of which has already started, carbon storage, and water management. And one idea is that we would take all that entrepreneurial energy that we've got going and help those older industries make the transition to new products and services. It's also going to be really important that we strengthen our workforce development to support all of these industries. A lot of the companies that consider working here or consider expanding here mention workforce development workforce, I should say, as an impediment. And obviously, as an issue of inclusion, we really need to make sure that we're training our own workforce to take these jobs rather than exclusively recruiting people to come and work in these industries. So while growing the economy and lifting up opportunities for all our residents are essential, perhaps more important still are additional flood risk reduction efforts. State and federal leaders must invest in extensive wetland restoration in addition to what the Army Corps has done by completing their system. I think all of you know that the wetlands are the first line of defense against storm surge. And beyond that, New Orleanians should lead by example by implementing many of the good Dutch-inspired ideas in the city's master plan for integrating water into the city's form and function. These efforts will be critical to provide greater security for those who have returned and rebuild as sea levels continue to rise and the coast continues to subside.